Hello everyone, my name is Liu Yi. I'm an assistant professor in economics. I'm from School of International Trade and Economics in Zhuxi. Today I'm going to talk about Chapter 9, Trade Policies in the Developing and Developed Countries. In this video, I'm going to discuss foreign trade policy of South Korea. South Korea foreign trade policy will be displayed in two videos. In this video, we will provide a brief review of the related trade and industrial policies of South Korea during 1960s and 1990s. After watching this video, you will be able to answer how South Korea achieved economic success through its carefully formulated economic and trade policy. South Korea was regarded as a representative country that successfully implemented export-oriented industrialization. It was also considered as one of the four Asian tigers to present the Asian economic miracle, namely Hong Kong of China, Taiwan of China, Singapore, and South Korea. To begin with, we shall recall the history of South Korea. Similar to other Asian countries, South Korea was also invaded by Japan. The whole Korean peninsula was colonized by Japan during 1910 and 1945 until Japanese surrender after the Second World War. Colonization brought South Korea not only exploitation but also modernization. After the Second World War, Korean peninsula was divided into North Korea and the South Korea by Soviet Union and the United States of America. Since the Second World War, they became the clients of two ideology camps respectively, namely socialism and capitalism. The North and the South stands in the front line of the battle between the United States and the Soviet Union. When the two powers were competing for hegemony, the Korea War occurred in 1951 and ended in 1954. Each side was supported by external powers. The conflicts expanded to China's border. The war became a proxy war in the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. After all, the war changed nothing, besides the creation of death and ruins on both sides. At the initial stage of development after the Korean War, North Korea developed much faster than South Korea. South Korea has disadvantages in resources, but has advantage in having money safe harbors and being supported by the American. The U.S. provided aid, talents, training, and education to South Korea for the build-up of South Korean human capital. These advantages provide South Korea a great chance for the future industrialization and trade liberalization. It didn't take long for South Korea to catch up the North and other countries in economic development. Before the war, Korean GDP per capita was lower than that of Haiti, Ethiopia, Yemen, etc. In 1962, three-quarters of Korean economy was dominated by agriculture. In 1982, 94% of Korean GDP is dominated by industrial production. Up to now, South Korea's economy ranked the 10th in the world. GDP per capita reaches $30,000. What is more important is that South Korea is one of the few countries that achieved both high GDP per capita and equitable income distribution. The Gini coefficient of South Korea was just a bit more than 0.32 till 2016, while that of world average is 0.44. After learning the brief history of South Korea and its tremendous achievement, we are interested in knowing how did it do it. Through trade liberalization? The answer is of course not. Then what is it? The answer is through government intervention and carefully designed export expansion. After watching this video, you are expected to learn why South Korea's economic success was regarded as a man-made economic miracle. The two key strategies of South Korea are government-led industrial development and outward-oriented economic strategies. Firstly, Japanese colonization highly influenced South Korean industrialization. Park Geun-hye, or the father of previous South Korean woman president Park Geun-hye, took the government in the age of 1961. His policy makers realized from the Japanese experience that it is important to build a solid industrial base as the cornerstone of the future development. These cornerstone industries that are backbone of the modern industrial economy. For example, steel, petrochemical, non-ferrous, metal, refined oil, shipbuilding, automobile industry, and electronics. In order to develop these industries, long-run strategies were needed. In order to encourage investment and to promote the diversification of manufactured exports. However, at the beginning of industrialization, domestic private sectors were very weak. They are reluctant to invest heavily in these capital-intensive sectors. As a result, it is necessary for the government to give the initiative to establish the cornerstone industries. Government decided to target a few sectors that were expected to perform well in international market. To encourage the participation of private sectors, companies that entering government program will be granted special incentives. Similar to other developing countries, South Korea also implemented ISI policy at the initial stage of development. However, ISI policy did not last long. It was started in 1951 and ended in 1960. Despite many problems in ISI policy also played an important role in South Korea, even though South Korea did not experience a dramatic economic growth during that period. Comparing the GDP created by ISI strategy and GDP produced by export expansion, GDP growth during the ISI period was one-third of that during the export-oriented industrialization from 1961 to 1979. South Korea's economic development experienced three stages. The first stage is the import substitution from 1954 to 1960. The second started is export-oriented industrialization from 1961 to 1979. The third stage is the balancing and stabilization after 1980. In the first period, ISI policy was implemented. After the Korean War in 1954, South Korea was preoccupied with post-war reconstruction. There were limited effort in industrialization. During that period, domestic market was heavily protected. Manufacturing sectors were too weak to compete internationally. There is inefficiency of foreign reserve to sustain the purchasing of foreign technology and capital-intensive equipment. Because of these disadvantages, industries were unable to move up the import substitution ladder. Nevertheless, these disadvantages become a lucky charm for South Korea. ISI could not last long without the import of essential raw materials. As a result, ISI was ended in 1960. ISI policy also has other two important functions. First, it created the initial funding capital for export expansion. Second, government selected their targeting industries that were expected to export in the future, such as shipbuilding, machinery, heavy equipment, etc. This decision greatly influenced the market structure of South Korea and created giant conglomerates and chaebols such as Samsung, LG, etc. Park's military regime took the office in 1960. He made the choice of creating industrial base for export production that could be used for financing vital imports, such as fertilizer. This period was characterized as state-guided strategic industrialization and export expansion. Import substitution industrialization was not fully ended in South Korea because some ideas were kept in the development of the second period. Economic policy integrated the development of both import substitution as well as export activity in the early 1970s. ISI policy and export-oriented industrialization policy are two different trade policies. One is focusing on self-dependency of every stage of production, and another is emphasizing the independency of domestic economy on foreign exports. It looks like both policies are contradicting with each other. However, the export-oriented trade and industrial substitution policy integrated with each other and worked harmoniously in South Korea. An important difference between the ISI in Latin America and South Korea is the latter focusing on trade expansion in making industrial policy. Industrial policies in South Korea service export purpose. There is an important cycle in the development model of South Korea. First, in order to meet the world demand, the government takes the initiative by investing in a new industry. Second, government protects and incubates the domestic industrialization. In the meanwhile, protection is reduced gradually while domestic industry acquiring productivity. Third, as domestic sector started to produce product, protection policies are replaced by fiscal and financial policies. Fourth, exporting accumulates precious foreign currency for the import of essentials such as capital and technology needed for the future deeper industrialization. The ultimate purpose of this model is to acquire competitiveness in the world market. By implementing virtuous circle in a new industry, the development of that industry shall be achieved. In this model, government should take the initiative every time for development of a new industry. From the South Korean case, we can see that government intervention is very important. It provides money instruments to maintain the functioning of the virtuous cycle. As we can see from Figure 1, government takes the major role in industrialization, especially in infrastructure and social sector. As time goes by, government's share of investment in infrastructure and social sector has been increased to over three-quarters. At the start of industrialization, government's investment in private industry and manufacturing sectors took about 25%. As private sectors started to acquire competitiveness in the world market, government's participation started to decline. The third period was started after 1980. It was focusing on structural adjustments such as restoring the balance of payment and welfare-oriented social development. Let's wrap up in the end of this video. First, South Korea has created tremendous achievement in economic growth and development. Second, the tremendous achievement of South Korea is attributed by many reasons, including its geographical characteristics and its geopolitical advantages. The most important is the designing of industrial and trade-related policies. Third, from the South Korea's experience, we can say that if well designed, some parts of ISA policy can be integrated with export expansion policy and serve industrial development and economic growth. That's the end of the video. Thank you for your listening.